The smell of cedar and turpentine was the scent of safety. To Illyra, it was the smell of home. The cabin sat nestled in a valley of the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by ancient hemlocks and Douglas firs that stood like silent sentinels. For as long as Illyra could remember, which, if she were honest, only really went back to the age of 5, this was her entire universe. The world outside the tree line was a chaotic, fractured place, or so Silas told her. The world is a hungry thing, Illyra, Silas would say, his voice as smooth as polished stone. It devours beautiful things. Here, we keep the beauty alive. Silas was a tall man with hands that were perpetually stained with either garden soil or oil paint. He was her uncle, her teacher, and her guardian. He had rescued her after the Great Fire, the hazy tragedy that had supposedly claimed her parents and left her an orphan. Silas had stepped in, whisking her away to the sanctuary where the corrupting influence of the city couldn't reach them. On the morning of her 20th birthday, the mist hung low over the creek. Silas was packing his rugged old truck. Once a month, he made the 3-hour trek into the clearing, a town he never named, to trade his wood carvings and Illyra's paintings for supplies they couldn't produce themselves. "I'll be back before the moon hits the peak of the ridge," Silas said, tightening a strap over a crate of supplies. He stepped toward her, tucking a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear. His gaze was intense, a mixture of pride and something Illyra couldn't quite name, a shadow of vigilance. "Stay within the perimeter today. The wolves are restless with the early frost." "I know, Silas. I'm not a child anymore," Illyra replied with a playful smile, though a small part of her chafed at the restriction. "To me, you are the most precious thing in existence. And precious things must be guarded." He kissed her forehead, a gesture that felt like a seal of ownership, and drove away. The silence that followed was heavy. Usually, Illyra spent these days painting in the meadow, but today, she felt a strange, restless energy. She wanted to do something for him, a surprise for his return. Silas had often complained about the clutter in the attic, a space he used for storage of the past, and strictly forbade her from entering, claiming the floorboards were rotting. But Illyra was light, and she was curious. She decided she would clear out the old junk and surprise him with a clean, renovated studio space for his wood carving. The attic door groaned as she pushed it open. The air was thick with the scent of stagnant thyme and dust motes dancing in the thin beams of light piercing through the cedar shingles. It wasn't as dangerous as Silas had claimed, the floor felt sturdy enough beneath her boots. She spent hours hauling old moth-eaten blankets and rusted tools toward the stairs. In the furthest corner, tucked under a heavy canvas tarp, sat a trunk. It was made of dark, heavy oak, bound in tarnished brass. Unlike the rest of the attic, this trunk was meticulously clean, as if Silas touched it often. There was no key, but the latch was loose. "Just a peek," she whispered to the empty room. Inside were clothes, small, colorful garments that looked like they belonged to a toddler. A pair of tiny red sneakers. A stuffed rabbit with one eye missing. Illyra felt a pang of sadness. "These must be my things," she thought. The only things he saved from the fire. As she lifted a heavy winter coat from the bottom of the trunk, she noticed the floor of the chest felt uneven. She pressed down on the left side, and a faint click echoed through the quiet attic. A false bottom popped up, revealing a slim compartment. Illyra's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Inside the compartment was a plastic sleeve. She pulled it out. It wasn't a photo of her parents or a legal document about the fire. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle with age. The headline, in bold, terrifying black ink, read: "Massive manhunt for missing toddler, Callie Thorne vanishes from Highland Park." Below the headline was a photograph. It was a grainy, black and white image of a 2-year-old girl with a familiar splash of freckles across her nose and a distinct, crescent-shaped birthmark just above her left eyebrow. Illyra reached up, her fingers trembling as they traced the exact same crescent-shaped mark on her own brow. She turned the clipping over. On the back, someone had written in familiar, elegant cursive the same handwriting that had taught her how to form her letters. She is finally safe. She is mine now. The world didn't tilt, it shattered. Illyra looked at the date on the newspaper. It was dated 18 years ago. The Great Fire had never happened. Her parents weren't ghosts, they were people who had likely spent nearly 2 decades wondering if their daughter was dead or alive. Suddenly, the sound of a distant engine rumbled through the trees. Silas was back early. Illyra looked at the missing child poster, then at the tiny red sneakers, and finally at the attic door. The cabin didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. The hemlocks outside didn't look like sentinels, they looked like bars. The man who had raised her, the man who had tucked her in and told her stories of the hungry world, was the very monster he had claimed to be protecting her from. She wasn't Illyra. She was Callie Thorne. And she wasn't home, she was in a cage that had been painted to look like a kingdom. The truck engine died in the driveway. The heavy thud of the cabin's front door closing echoed up through the floorboards. Illyra. Silas's voice called out from below, warm and terrifyingly calm. I have a surprise for you, little bird. Illyra clutched the newspaper clipping to her chest, her breath hitching in her throat. The architect of her life was standing just 1 floor below, and for the first time in 20 years, she realized she didn't know him at all. The sound of Silas's boots on the hardwood floor downstairs felt like hammer blows against Illyra's skull. Thud. 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 Each step was a reminder of how small her world had become, and how thin the walls of her sanctuary actually were. Panic, cold and sharp, surged through her veins. She looked down at the missing child poster in her hands. The girl in the photo Callie seemed to be pleading with her to run. But there was nowhere to go. The forest was miles deep, and Silas knew every deer trail and seasonal creek better than he knew his own reflection. With trembling hands, Illyra shoved the clipping and the tiny red sneakers back into the false bottom of the trunk. She pressed the wood panel back into place, hearing the sickeningly final click of the spring. She threw the moth-eaten blankets back over the trunk and scrambled toward the attic stairs, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Illyra? Are you up there, little bird? Silas was at the foot of the stairs. His voice was melodic, yet it carried a weight that pinned her to the spot. I'm just cleaning, Silas. She called back, her voice cracking. She hated the tremor in it. She cleared her throat and wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans. I wanted to surprise you. For my birthday. She descended the ladder slowly, her legs feeling like lead. When she reached the bottom, Silas was standing there, framed by the golden light of the afternoon sun. He looked exactly as he always did, the kind, weathered face, the gentle eyes, the silvering hair. But now, all she saw was a mask. She saw the man in the grainy police sketch, 20 years older but with the same predatory stillness. The attic is drafty, Illyra, he said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he reached out to brush a cobweb from her shoulder. His touch made her skin crawl, a physical revulsion she had never felt before. I told you the floorboards were unsafe. I wouldn't want you to fall. I was careful, she whispered. Come, he said, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder and guiding her toward the kitchen. I brought back something special. A gift for the woman you've become. On the kitchen table sat a box wrapped in pale blue paper. Beside it was a feast, expensive cheeses, fruits they couldn't grow in the valley, and a bottle of dark, red wine. To anyone else, it would look like a celebration. To Illyra, it looked like a bribe. Open it, he urged. She tore the paper away. Inside was a dress silk, the color of a bruised plum. It was beautiful, expensive, and utterly wrong. Blue, she muttered, her mind flashing back to the black and white photo of the toddler in the park. Was Callie wearing blue that day? It matches your eyes, Silas said, stepping closer. He smelled of pine resin and something metallic, the scent of the hardware store. Your mother always said you looked best in blue. The lie hit her like a physical blow. Which mother? The fictional woman he had invented to fill the void of her memory, or the woman who had cried for 18 years? Thank you, Silas, she said, forcing a smile that felt like a scar. Dinner was a masterclass in psychological torture. Silas spoke at length about the chaos he had seen in town, the shouting people, the flashing screens, the rot of modern society. He spoke as if he were a prophet who had led her to the promised land. Illyra sat across from him, picking at her food, her mind racing. She needed more than a newspaper clipping. She needed a map, a phone, or a key. Silas kept his study, a small room off the master bedroom, locked at all times. He claimed it was where he kept the boring legal documents and tax papers from his carvings. You're quiet tonight, little bird, Silas remarked, swirling the wine in his glass. Is the weight of 20 years sitting heavy on you? I'm just thinking about the future, she said. It wasn't a lie. The future is here, he replied firmly. As long as we have each other, the world cannot touch us. I have protected you from everything, Illyra. Never forget that. Without me, you would have been lost to the fire. The fire that never happened, she thought. The fire you lit in my mind. After dinner, Silas retreated to his workshop in the shed to finish a piece. This was her window. She waited until she heard the steady, rhythmic rasp of his wood plane before she crept toward his study. The door was locked, as expected. But Illyra had spent 20 years watching Silas. She knew he wasn't just a woodsman, he was a man of habit. He kept the spare keys in a hollowed-out copy of the Odyssey on the living room bookshelf, a poetic irony she hadn't understood until now. She found the key, her fingers slick with sweat. The lock turned with a heavy thunk. The study was cold. Unlike the rest of the cabin, which was filled with Illyra's bright paintings and warm wood, this room was sterile. It smelled of old paper and bleach. She sat at his desk and began to go through the drawers. Most were filled with receipts and sketches. But the bottom drawer was locked with a separate, sturdier padlock. She searched the desk surface, finding a small, silver key hidden inside a pen cup. When the drawer slid open, Illyra's breath hitched. It wasn't just one clipping. It was an archive. There were dozens of newspapers from over the years. Thorne family offers $1 million reward. 10 years since Callie Thorne vanished. Mother of missing girl refuses to give up hope. And then, she saw it. A thick, manila envelope. Inside was her birth certificate. Name, Callie Rose Thorne. Date of birth, May 14th. Parents, Thomas and Elena Thorne. There were also photos, real ones. Not the ones Silas had shown her. These were candid shots of a young couple holding a baby with a crescent-shaped birthmark. They looked happy. They looked real. But the most chilling item was at the very bottom, a notebook. She opened it and saw Silas's handwriting, dated from the year she was taken. July 12th, I saw her today at the park. The parents don't deserve such purity. They let her wander 10 feet away to talk to a dog. They are careless. The world will break her if she stays with them. I will be her father. I will be her God. I will build a world where she is never neglected again. It wasn't a rescue. It was a theft of the soul. He hadn't taken her because she was in danger, he had taken her because he felt entitled to her. A sudden floorboard creaked behind her. Illyra froze. The rasping sound of the wood plane in the shed had stopped. How long had it been silent? It's rude to read a man's private thoughts, Illyra. The voice came from the doorway. Silas was standing there, his silhouette blocking the light from the hallway. In his hand, He held a carving knife, the blade gleaming like a sliver of the moon. His face was no longer the mask of a kindly uncle. It was the face of the architect, watching his creation crumble. "I found the papers, Silas," she said, her voice trembling but her eyes fixed on his. "I found Callie." Silas didn't flinch. He stepped into the room, the door swinging shut behind him with a final, echoing click. "Callie Thorne died the day I found her," he said softly, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are Illyra now. And I'm afraid you've become very, very confused." He took another step forward. The golden cage had just turned into a tomb. The air in the study was thin, tasting of old ink and the metallic tang of Silas's carving knife. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was a living thing, bloated with 18 years of secrets that had finally burst. Silas didn't move. He stood in the doorway, the light from the hall casting a long, distorted shadow that stretched across the floor, swallowing the birth certificate of Callie Rose Thorne. "You weren't supposed to find this, Illyra," Silas said. His voice was a low, melodic thrum, devoid of the anger she expected. It was the voice he used when he was explaining the migration of birds or the way a tree rings told the story of its struggle. "Some truths are like wildfires. They don't illuminate, they only consume." Illyra's fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. The wood bit into her skin, a grounding pain. "My name is Callie," she whispered, her voice sounding foreign in her own ears. "You took me. You didn't save me from a fire. You stole me from a park." Silas sighed a heavy, weary sound, as if he were the one who had been betrayed. He stepped into the room, and the floorboards didn't even groan. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who had spent a lifetime blending into the shadows of the forest. He set the carving knife down on the corner of the desk, the blade clicking softly against the wood. "Sit down, Illyra," he commanded. It wasn't a request. She didn't move. "Tell me the truth, Silas. No more metaphors. No more stories about the hungry world. Tell me why my mother's face is on a reward poster and why you have my birth certificate locked in a drawer." Silas leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. The mask of the gentle uncle was still there, but it was cracking, revealing something colder and more ancient beneath. "I told you the world is a hungry thing, and I wasn't lying. Your parents, Thomas and Elena, they were the architects of their own tragedy. They were careless, Illyra. They were distracted by their phones, by their petty arguments, by their comfortable, shallow lives. I watched them for weeks. I watched how they left you at the edge of the sandbox while they looked away. I saw a miracle being wasted on people who didn't understand its value. So you just took me." Illyra's voice rose, a mixture of horror and disbelief. "You decided you were better than them. You stole a child because you didn't like how they parented." "I chose you," Silas corrected, his eyes flashing with a sudden, terrifying intensity. "I saw a soul that deserved a sanctuary. I saw a girl who would have been crushed by the noise and the filth of the city. I gave you this life. I gave you the woods, the art, the peace. I sculpted you into the masterpiece you are today. Do you think Callie Thorne would have known how to track a deer through the snow? Do you think she would have understood the way light dances on a canvas at dawn? No. She would have been a hollow shell, another product of a broken society." He walked toward her, and Illyra instinctively backed away until her spine hit the bookshelf. He stopped inches from her, his presence overwhelming. The scent of pine and hardware store was replaced by something sharper, the smell of a man who believed his own lies. "Look at me, Illyra," he said, grabbing her chin with a hand that was surprisingly rough. "Look at the life we have. You have never known hunger. You have never known fear. You have never been lied to about the things that matter: the earth, the sky, the beauty of silence. I am the man who stayed. I am the man who protected you while those people moved on and had another life. They didn't move on. Illyra screamed, twisting her face away from his grip. There are clippings in that drawer from 5 years ago. 10 years ago. My mother never stopped looking. You're a kidnapper, Silas. You're a criminal. The word criminal seemed to strike him. Silas's expression shifted. The warmth drained out of his eyes, leaving them as flat and gray as the Pacific. He didn't hit her. He didn't yell. Instead, he did something worse, he smiled. It was a thin, pitying smile. You're having a breakdown, little bird, he said softly. The shock of your birthday, the wine, it's all too much for you. You've imagined a monster where there is only a father. You've let a few old papers from a different life poison your mind. He reached for the manila envelope on the desk. Illyra tried to grab it first, but he was faster. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the envelope and the notebook into the small cast iron stove in the corner of the study. He struck a match. No. Illyra lunged for the stove, but Silas caught her by the waist, his arms like iron bands. She watched in a daze as the flames licked at the brittle paper. The headline about the missing girl curled and turned to ash. The birth certificate, the only legal proof that she existed outside of this cabin, blackened and vanished. The notebook, containing the confession of his obsession, became nothing but smoke. There, Silas whispered into her ear, his breath warm and terrifying. The ghosts are gone. Now there is only us. There is only the valley and the girl I raised. He released her, and Illyra slumped to the floor, her eyes fixed on the dying embers in the stove. The weight of her loss was crushing. Everything she had just found, the parents she might have had, the name she had been born with, was gone in a matter of seconds. Go to your room, Illyra, Silas said, his voice returning to its usual calm, authoritative tone. Tomorrow, we will begin the relocation. I had hoped to wait another year, but it seems the air here has become tainted. Relocation. Illyra looked up, her face pale. We're moving further north. Into the mountains. Away from the trails, away from the possibility of more accidental discoveries. You'll love it there. The light is even better for your landscapes. He reached down and picked up the carving knife from the desk, turning it over in his hand. Don't try the windows. I'll be sitting in the living room tonight, and I have a very keen ear for the sound of a latch. He walked out of the room, and for the first time, Illyra heard the sound she had never expected to hear in her home. The sound of a heavy bolt sliding into place on the outside of her bedroom door. The golden cage had been replaced by a prison of iron and wood. Illyra sat in the dark of her room, the blue silk dress he had given her feeling like a shroud. She wasn't Callie Thorne anymore, and she wasn't Illyra. She was a ghost in a house of lies, and the man who had taught her how to paint was now drawing the borders of her grave. But as she sat there, her hand brushed against something in her pocket. In the chaos of the study, she had managed to palm one small thing before Silas caught her. She pulled it out. It was the one-eyed stuffed rabbit from the trunk. The only physical piece of her past that Silas hadn't burned. She clutched it to her chest, the worn fabric a tether to a world she had to find. I'm coming for you, she whispered into the dark, though she didn't know if she was talking to her parents or the girl she used to be. I'm coming home. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the hemlocks, and Silas began to whistle a low, haunting tune in the kitchen, the sound of a man who was satisfied with his work. The moonlight bled through the slats of the wooden shutters, casting long, skeletal shadows across Illyra's bedroom floor. The cabin, once a place of warmth and the scent of baking bread, now felt like a ribcage, and she was the heart being squeezed inside it. Every creak of the house was a threat. From the living room, she heard the rhythmic scritch-scritch of Silas's sharpening stone. He wasn't sleeping. He was preparing. He had told her they were moving at dawn, deeper into the mountains where the air wasn't tainted. Illyra knew what that meant, a deeper silence, a thicker forest, and a disappearance so final that Callie Thorne would truly cease to exist. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the one-eyed rabbit. She wasn't crying anymore. The tears had dried into a cold, hard crust of resolve. She looked at her art supplies, the tubes of oil paint, the brushes, the easel. For years, she had used these tools to capture the beauty Silas pointed out to her. Now, she needed them to destroy the world he had built. She reached for her heavy metal palette knife. It was an old tool, the blade thick and sharpened from years of scraping dried lead white off her boards. She also took a small, pointed carving gouge she had borrowed from his workshop months ago to experiment with woodcuts. "The world is a hungry thing, Illyra," his voice echoed in her head. "No," she whispered back, her voice a jagged sliver of glass. "You are the only thing here that's hungry." She approached the window. Silas had nailed it shut from the outside years ago, claiming it was to keep the mountain chill out, but now she saw the nails for what they were, prison bars. She began to work the palette knife into the seam of the frame. She worked with the patience he had taught her, moving only when the wind howled through the hemlocks to drown out the sound of splintering wood. Minutes felt like hours. Her fingers bled as she pried at the rusted heads of the nails. Finally, with a sickening groan of protest, the bottom sash gave way. She froze, heart hammering against her teeth, listening for the sharpening stone in the next room. The scritch-scritch continued. Silas was lost in his own ritual. Illyra shoved the window up. The freezing night air hit her face like a slap, smelling of damp earth and freedom. She didn't take a coat, the blue silk dress was thin and useless, but she couldn't risk the noise of opening her closet. She threw her boots out first, then hiked up the hem of the dress and tumbled into the dirt below. The ground was like ice. She scrambled into her boots, not bothering to lace them, and bolted toward the tree line. She didn't use the main trail. Silas would expect that. Instead, she pushed through the dense thicket of blackberry brambles and devil's club, the thorns tearing at the silk of her dress and the skin of her arms. She ran until her lungs burned, until the cabin was nothing but a dim yellow eye in the darkness behind her. But the forest was Silas's kingdom. "Illyra. Little bird, you'll catch your death in this cold." The voice didn't come from behind her. It seemed to come from the trees themselves, amplified by the heavy mountain air. Illyra stopped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked around, the moonlight playing tricks on her eyes. Every shadow looked like a tall man with a carving knife. "I know where you're going, Callie," the voice said, closer now. He used her real name like a taunt, a way to show he still held power over the truth. "You're looking for the road. But the road is miles away, and the wolves are faster than you." Illyra didn't scream. She ducked behind a massive, moss-covered cedar and gripped the palette knife. Crackle! A branch snapped 20 feet to her left. Silas emerged from the gloom. He wasn't running, he was walking with the steady, inexorable pace of a hunter who knows his prey is trapped. He held a high-powered flashlight in one hand and his long carving knife in the other. The beam of light cut through the mist, searching for the flash of blue silk. "Come back to the warmth, Illyra," he said, his tone shifting back to that terrifyingly gentle father figure mask. "I forgive you. It's the shock. We'll get to the new place, and you'll forget all about those dusty papers. You'll paint the glaciers. You'll be happy again." "I was never happy," Illyra shouted, her voice echoing through the canyon. She stepped out from behind the tree, the palette knife held low. "I was a prisoner who didn't know she was in a cell. I saw the notebook, Silas. I saw how you watched my parents. You didn't save me, you stole me because you were lonely and small." Silas stopped. The flashlight beam hit her full in the face, blinding her. She squinted, seeing only his dark silhouette behind the glare. "Small," he whispered. The gentleness vanished. His voice became a low, guttural growl. I gave you a life of purity. I saved you from a world that would have taught you how to lie, how to hate, how to rot. I am the only reason you have a soul, Illyra. I created you. Without me, you are nothing but a ghost of a girl who died in a park 18 years ago. He lunged. He was faster than a man his age should have been. Illyra dove to the side, the carving knife whistling past her ear. She swung the palette knife blindly, feeling the metal bite into something soft his arm. Silas hissed in pain, dropping the flashlight. The world went dark, save for the erratic beam of the light rolling on the forest floor, illuminating patches of dirt and blood. You bit the hand that fed you, Silas snarled. He didn't sound like her uncle anymore. He sounded like a beast. He tackled her, his weight pinning her into the freezing mud. His hands, those hands that had taught her how to hold a brush, now clamped around her throat. Illyra thrashed, her vision blurring as the air was cut off. She could see his face in the flickering light of the dropped flashlight. His eyes were wide, vacant, the eyes of a man who had completely lost the thread of his own delusion. You are mine, he choked out. If I can't keep you in the light, I'll keep you in the earth. Illyra's hand searched the mud, her fingers closing around the small carving gouge she had tucked into her waistband. With the last of her strength, she slammed the pointed tool into Silas's shoulder. He cried out, his grip loosening just enough for Illyra to fill her lungs with a jagged gasp of air. She bucked him off and scrambled away, grabbing the flashlight as she went. She didn't look back. She ran toward the sound of the rushing creek, the boundary Silas had always told her was the edge of the world. She reached the wooden footbridge he had built years ago. It was a narrow, precarious thing over a gorge of white water and jagged rocks. She crossed it, her boots thumping hollowly on the planks. When she reached the other side, she turned and shone the light back. Silas stood at the foot of the bridge, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He looked small now, a ragged, old man standing in the ruins of his own lie. The mask was completely gone, leaving only a hollow, desperate creature. Illyra, please, he called out, his voice cracking. Don't go into the dark. You don't know what's out there. I know what's behind me, she said, her voice steady for the first time in 20 years. And that's enough. She took the heavy palette knife and began to hack at the guide ropes of the bridge. Silas took a step forward, but the bridge swayed violently. He froze, realizing that if he stepped onto it, he might fall into the abyss he had spent 18 years warning her about. With one final, desperate swing, the rope snapped. The bridge plummeted into the gorge, the wood splintering against the rocks below. Illyra stood on the far bank, separated from her past by a chasm that could never be crossed. She turned her back on the man who had stolen her life and began to walk toward the faint, flickering lights of a world she had been told to fear, but was finally ready to face. The transition from the wilderness to the world of men was not a sudden burst of light, it was a slow, agonizing crawl through the freezing mud. Illyra, or the girl who was trying to become Calithorn, felt the asphalt of the mountain road beneath her boots before she saw the lights. It was cold, hard, and indifferent, a stark contrast to the soft, treacherous moss of Silas's woods. Her breath came in ragged, crystalline puffs. The blue silk dress was a tattered rag, stained with Silas's blood and the dark earth of the gorge. Her hands were numb, her fingernails torn from hacking at the bridge ropes. She walked until her legs felt like wooden stilts, her eyes fixed on a flickering neon sign in the distance, a lone gas station standing like a lighthouse at the edge of the abyss. When she stumbled into the fluorescent glare of the station, the bell above the door chimed a cheerful, mundane sound that made her want to scream. The clerk, a young man with headphones around his neck, looked up from his phone and froze. He didn't see a niece or a precious bird. He saw a ghost. Please, she rasped, her throat raw from the cold and the screaming. Call the police. Tell them Calithorn is back. The hours that followed were a blurred montage of sterile white rooms and sharp, intrusive questions. The world Silas had described as hungry and cruel felt mostly loud and overwhelming. There were sirens that pierced the quiet she had known for 20 years. There were detectives with tired eyes who looked at her with a mixture of pity and professional skepticism. "You understand, miss," a detective Miller said, leaning over a metal table in a small precinct room, "that Callie Thorne disappeared nearly 2 decades ago. We get leads every year. People who want the reward, people who are confused. I have the birthmark," she said, lifting her hair to show the crescent-shaped mark above her eyebrow. "And I have this." She placed the one-eyed stuffed rabbit on the table. It looked pathetic under the harsh LED lights, a relic of a stolen life. He kept it in a trunk in the attic. He kept everything he couldn't bring himself to burn. The DNA test took 48 hours. They were the longest hours of her life. She was kept in a hospital room, not because she was sick, but because the authorities didn't know where else to put a girl who didn't legally exist. She stared at the television on the wall, a glowing box Silas had called a window to rot. She watched news reports about herself. Missing heir found. The girl in the woods. On the third morning, the door opened. It wasn't the detective. It was a man and a woman. They looked nothing like the vibrant, young couple in the photos Silas had hidden. The man's hair was a shock of white, his face etched with the deep lines of a life spent grieving. The woman looked fragile, as if a strong wind might shatter her, her eyes rimmed with the permanent redness of 1,000 sleepless nights. The silence in the room was deafening. Ilora stood up, her heart hammering. She felt like an imposter. She had spent 20 years loving the man who had destroyed these people. She felt a sickening sense of guilt, a phantom loyalty to Silas that she couldn't claw out of her chest. "Callie," the woman whispered. Her voice broke on the name. Ilora didn't know what to say. I think so." The woman, Elena Thorne, moved forward with a sob that sounded like a physical wound opening up. She didn't care about the blue dress or the scars on Ilora's arms. She pulled her daughter into an embrace that smelled of expensive perfume and desperate, suffocating love. It was different from Silas's hugs. Silas hugged her like a collector holding a rare vase. Elena hugged her like a person finding their own heart outside of their body. In the weeks that followed, the architect was finally brought to justice. The police had raided the cabin, finding Silas sitting in his rocking chair by the hearth, the bridge gone and his shoulder crudely bandaged. He hadn't tried to run. According to the reports, he had been waiting for her to come home. When they led him away in handcuffs, he didn't look like a monster. He looked like the man who had taught her how to paint the sunset. That was the cruelest part of the kidnapping. He hadn't just stolen her body, he had colonized her mind. Ilora sat in her new bedroom in a sprawling estate in the city, a room filled with things Callie Thorne was supposed to like. There were soft carpets, high-end art supplies, and a window that looked out over a manicured garden instead of an endless forest. Her parents tried so hard. They bought her clothes, they took her to therapists, they sat with her in a silence that was heavy with the 18 years they had missed. One evening, Ilora sat at her new easel. She tried to paint the garden, but her hand kept drifting toward the dark greens and deep shadows of the hemlocks. She realized then that there were 2 deaths she had to mourn. The first was Callie Thorne, the girl who would have grown up with birthday parties, school dances, and a mother's constant presence. That girl was gone, murdered by Silas's obsession. The second was Ilora, the girl who loved the woods and the man who raised her. She had to kill that girl every single day. She had to remind herself that the warmth of the cabin was a lie, and the safety was a cage. She picked up a brush and began to paint over the dark trees with a stark, blinding white. There was a knock on the door. Her father, Thomas, stood there, looking hesitant. "Callie? We're going out for dinner. Your mother found a quiet place. No crowds." She looked at him, seeing the stranger who shared her DNA. She saw the pain in his eyes, the pain Silas had caused, and the pain she reminded him of every time she spoke with Silas's accent or used Silas's metaphors. "I'll be ready in a minute," she said, forcing a smile. As he left, she looked back at her canvas. The white paint was still wet, a blank space where the forest used to be. She wasn't Callie yet, and she was no longer Illyra. She was something in between, a survivor standing in the ruins of a life, learning how to build a world that wasn't designed by a madman. The golden cage was gone. The architect was in a cell. But as she looked at the moon through the glass, she knew the woods would always be there, whispering in the back of her mind, reminding her that the man who raised her was the man who had ended her before she ever began. She picked up the one-eyed rabbit and placed it on the windowsill. "We're out now," she whispered to the stuffed toy. "We're finally out." The world outside was still hungry, still loud, and still strange. But for the first time in 20 years, the door wasn't locked from the outside.